Hello and welcome to the Intellect's Cove. My name is Colin Fairley. I'm a philosopher and political theorist based at Queen's University in Canada. And in this video today, my goal is to say a few words about my teaching philosophy, especially as it pertains to this channel here. Technically speaking, it's better to discuss teaching philosophies, meaning I have many different teaching philosophies. It depends on the context in which I'm teaching as to what the underlying teaching philosophy is. So my teaching philosophy for this channel is what I'm going to specifically focus on, but it's important to recognize that one's teaching philosophy really is context dependent, and in different contexts I will adopt a different teaching philosophy. So for example, when I'm teaching a very large lecture course where I'm mostly going to do most of the talking and students have very little background in the field of political theory or bioethics, then my teaching philosophy will be a little bit different and the style of delivery of the educational content will be different. And that can be contrasted with a small graduate seminar where you might have doctoral students or MA students who already have a lot of background expertise in the specific topic, and you can have a little bit more discussion and debate than you can in a large lecture format. And the context of formal educational institutes are a little bit different than some of the other venues where I have commonly engaged with the skill sets of political philosophy and ethics. So for example, for 7 years I used to run a political philosophy reading group for inmates in prison, and that context was also different. The inmates did have access to the reading materials in advance. Some had some background in liberal arts education, others had none, and in that kind of setting I learned different ways in which we could achieve different pedagogical goals. I also, in the run-up to the pandemic, tried to experiment with a philosophy for children. I did 2 classes for kids around age 10. The pandemic and closure of schools kind of put an end to that experiment, but that also gave me a very different kind of skill set and way of looking at my teaching philosophy when you're teaching very young children about things like democracy. Some other contexts, I've been running a philosophy meetup group for I think 7 or 8 years. I've organized over 250 philosophy discussion events, and so this would be just local people in the community, many of which have no background in philosophy, perhaps not even in higher education, and again engaging and facilitating discussions and debate in that context also has given me lots of insights about the different styles to approach engaging people with some of these topics. So each context matters, and for me the YouTube channel is a brand new, I've kind of tried to push the envelope of the environments in which I teach and engage with this material, ranging from universities in 5 different countries to inmates in prison, to kids in elementary school, to pubs and parks with my philosophy meetup group. So this is a new endeavor for me. It's kind of like the next frontier in terms of trying to see how I can deliver online content to YouTube. And the second thing that I'll mention in my approach to teaching philosophies is that they're also always provisional, right? Like as I've gone through nearly 30 years of being an instructor in institutions of higher education, I've reflected and modified and evolved my own style of teaching and what I take to be the end game that we're trying to work towards in those different contexts. So that also applies to this YouTube channel. What I'm going to canvas here is my provisional attempt to articulate my teaching philosophy, but it's subject to change, it's provisional, and it may change as I make more videos and I kind of gauge what this experience is like, both for me as the person recording the videos and then for eventually hopefully an audience and hearing the experience on their end. Okay, so My teaching philosophy is context dependent and it's provisional. Okay, so let me actually get to my teaching philosophy for this channel now that I've navigated through all those provisos. Ultimately, I'm interested in the virtues of the mind. And the concept of a virtue is a morally loaded one. This actually is an exercise in moral education. But when we think of moral education, we think about somebody kind of trying to indoctrinate us with a particular list of rules of ethics or principles. That's not the way I'm approaching this idea of moral education that focuses on the virtues of the mind or the intellect. A virtue is defined in the Cambridge Dictionary as a quality, a good moral quality in a person or a general quality of being morally good. And when we think of moral virtues, we tend to think of things like somebody being honest, somebody being charitable. We don't typically think about the epistemic or intellectual virtues of the mind, but I'm a big proponent of a position known as virtue epistemology, which maintains that actually the virtues, the intellectual virtues that inform our actual decision-making in the real world are really central to living a life with moral, as a moral agent. And we should critically fixate our philosophical lens on these foundational epistemic or intellectual virtues. Now, if you're interested in this broader topic in virtue epistemology, I highly recommend Virtues of the Mind by a first-rate philosopher, Linda Zabzebski. That book has informed my own philosophical orientation towards virtue epistemology, and I've published a series of articles that extend virtue epistemology to a variety of other issues. All right, so I'm going to emphasize 3 virtues of the mind. I'm going to unpack each of these. So the first is going to be curiosity, second is intellectual humility, and the third one, cognitive flexibility. But let me first start with curiosity. Here is a definition of curiosity from a Psychological Bulletin: a cognitive-induced deprivation that arises from the perception of a gap in knowledge and understanding. All right, so we all have curiosity about something in the world, and the degree of our curiosity can occur on a spectrum from like a trivial interest to a lifelong obsession. So if we consider, for example, cars, I'm not particularly curious about cars. Like I become a little bit more curious when I'm like buying a new car or trading in my car. But like I don't lie in bed wondering like what makes one car go so much faster than another. I don't have to get into the mechanics of the details. So even though I have a gap in knowledge and understanding about what makes some cars go faster than others, I have a low level of curiosity about it, right? When I navigate through the world, you don't find a lot of my headspace being consumed by thoughts about speed and cars. But I know a lot of people that are oriented in this way, and you can go onto YouTube and you can find lots of channels where people are talking about like how to make your car faster, comparing, you know, various brands, sports car to a higher horsepower. So that's for them, there's curiosity about like how some motorized vehicles go faster than others. For me, the issues that keep me awake at night and have obsessed me for my whole adult lifespan concern questions about the good life, about how we should live collectively as a society. What should we be striving for in terms of meeting our aspirations or ideals of democracy, freedom, and equality? So this channel, I'm hoping, will entice those who have a curiosity about these high-level philosophical questions. And that's the first virtue of the mind, that as you're surfing through YouTube channels, you come across Intellect's Cove and you say, oh, I'm actually curious about what philosophers are pontificating about with respect to the science of aging or genome editing or the history of political thought. If so, then this channel is for you. And that's the first virtue of the mind. I want to get you curious about the subject matter, so I have to kind of frame the significance of it, explain the different positions people have taken on these issues. For me, my own curiosity, as I mentioned in my previous video, there's a couple of topics that I will pursue my curiosity on this channel. Philosophy broadly construed, which is what I have my PhD in, ethics and bioethics, which I've been focusing on for the last 25 years of my research, aging and longevity science, that is the area I've published the most in terms of books and journal articles, ranging from science and medicine to bioethics and philosophy. The history of political thought, that I've been teaching that since the last century. And I'm interested in working in higher education and the challenges and opportunities that researchers that are doing interdisciplinary research face. And so these are the kind of 5 core buckets that I intend to post videos on. So if you're curious about any of these specific topics, then I'm hoping you will find something of value in this channel. All right, so something that I'm very curious about and have a lot of passion for, but I'm not going to be addressing on this channel, is discussions and debates pertaining to contemporary politics, at least the variants that we encounter when you turn on the evening news or visit other social media sites. The idea behind Intellect's Cove is a retreat. Right? Recall, a cove is a sheltered area from the wind and the hazardous environment of the sea and the ocean. And so this channel is focusing on deep, meaningful questions, but they're not the ones that you're likely to be exposed to if you just turn on the evening news. I'm not suggesting that the topics on the evening news are not important, but you don't need to come to my channel for those discussions. And I do not enter into the public forum to pontificate on the news of the day. I focus on the news of the century or the millennial from a theoretical and philosophical perspective. So these are deep and meaningful questions, but they're distinct from the way in which the topics are framed by news and media that has a 90-second opportunity to kind of catch your attention and clickbait you with a provocative title. So contemporary politics, be curious about it, but this is not the forum for doing a deep dive into what's happening on a day-to-day basis, but rather these broader trends in philosophy and political theory that I'm particularly curious about. So curiosity is the first intellectual skill set I hope to celebrate and refine. Secondly is intellectual humility. This is really an important virtue of the mind for the 21st century, and speaking of contemporary politics, one that is often in very short supply. And so I'm hoping through an educational channel that I can make some small progress in inviting others to adopt an intellectually humble disposition towards the real world. So what is intellectual humility? I'm actually going to draw on some insights from an excellent review piece in Nature Reviews Psychology, Predictors and Consequences of Intellectual Humility. And I actually assigned this reading to my senior undergraduate course in the history of political thought. And political science students are a little puzzled as to why they have to read about psychology when they're primarily interested in politics. But this is extremely important to understand, that the human mind has evolved for certainty, confidence, and a kind of exaggeration of our understanding of the complexity of the world. And this creates many of the problems that we encounter in our everyday political lives. So I start with this so they at least have some understanding of why it's so important to cultivate intellectual humility and the things that can help steer us towards a more humble mindset versus ones that lead us to be overconfident or arrogant. All right, so let's start off with a couple of reflections from this article about what intellectual humility is. And the definition that they offer Intellectual humility involves recognizing there are gaps in one's knowledge and that one's current beliefs might be incorrect. Now, it can be extremely challenging to be humble about one's beliefs because we often don't know what we don't know, right? So we sometimes navigate with confidence purely as a result of our lack of insight into the range of topics we don't know about. So when I think about myself, when I was 20 years old, if you asked me about my political beliefs and convictions, I would be so confident and, firm in my convictions. And that reflected not from the fact that I had so much knowledge, but from the fact that I knew very little about what I didn't know. So ever since the age of 20, I have actually come to have less firm convictions, only because the more I learn, the smaller that these core convictions that I have high confidence in become. And that's a reflection of recognizing how uncertain many areas and domains of knowledge are and how complex the moral landscape is in terms of the different weights to place on values that often compete with each other. So recognizing that there are gaps and that even our core intuitions and convictions should be subject to scrutiny and possibly be revised. And there are threats to intellectual humility. It involves embracing uncertainty and ambiguity, entertaining the possibility that we might be incorrect. So often it can be a desire to protect our ego and our perception in the social landscape that we remain adamant in our convictions. Right? It's often seen as a political liability if a politician revises their stance or their position on a policy issue. I've always puzzled by that. It's like, oh, well, they must not have been, they didn't have full and complete knowledge at time one. So now, why would we ever vote for them? Well, it could be that new information has come to the fore. New insights about the efficacy or costs of particular policy implementation changes. So sometimes this changing of our belief system and our convictions is a good thing because it has relaxed our overconfidence when we actually had very little, sound empirical basis for them. So the pedagogical approach I adopt as a scholar and instructor to the channel Intellect's Cove is informed by this spirit that actually the goal is not to come up with the right answers to questions, but rather to improve our ability to recognize what constitutes good questions in the first place. And I think anybody who has done a degree in philosophy, and this certainly was the case for me in first year, I went into philosophy naively thinking I'm going to come out with all the answers about, what is the good life? Do we have free will? Does God exist? What is justice? And you quickly realize that the list of questions grows exponentially and the list of viable answers diminishes in a proportionate fashion. And this actually is a good thing because it's showing that actually some of the questions that we focus on have a subset of other questions that need to be disentangled and detailed with some caution and detail. So it's important to kind of recognize which questions should be at the foreground of our deliberations and which ones can we kind of push to the background. And I think as I mentioned, I'm a pragmatist philosopher. And John Dewey there's a great quotation from John Dewey where he says, we don't resolve certain questions, we just get over them, right? So it's this way of just dispensing with questions that perhaps should be less on the hierarchy list of things that we should be mulling about trying to solve, and then other questions that are much more, should be much more of a central focus. All right, so just to recap, we've covered curiosity, which is the first virtue of the mind that this channel is designed to identify and celebrate and refine. Secondly, intellectual humility. And now let me get to cognitive flexibility. This is a really critical virtue of the mind because it's the one which helps us orient how our beliefs and judgments will translate in terms of action, both as individuals and collectively as societies in the real world. There's a great characterization of cognitive flexibility going back over half a century in this article by William Scott, where he describes cognitive flexibility as the readiness with which a person's concept system changes selectively in response to appropriate environmental stimuli. All right, so the reality is that the external world, no matter where you live in the world, nobody's environment is stagnant. It's constantly changing. Sometimes new threats arise, like it did in 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic. Or new opportunities arise, as we're experiencing now in 2026 with respect to artificial intelligence. So how do we respond to things like a pandemic and new technological innovations? Cognitive flexibility is the ability to kind of update the software that we have in our own minds in terms of moral judgments and evaluations about the aspirations that we should be pursuing as a society. And I think this is particularly critical in the 21st century because we actually have a whole bunch of novel stimuli that our brains never really evolved to manage. So think about the phones that we all have in our pocket, which connect us to pretty much everyone you know, and perhaps people you've never met before. And, if nothing else, it's a constant distraction on our attention, but it can also have an impact on our ability to think with a plastic mindset. Think about the technological innovation that's occurred, like simply in my lifetime. When I was born, we had TVs, but then it changed with the internet, cell phones, the digital revolution. And thirdly, we have an epidemic of loneliness, a rise in mental health challenges. And so in a way, we are juggling many more balls than our evolutionary ancestors ever evolved to address. And if we don't invest serious time and energy in thinking about cognitive flexibility, we're going to be operating with software designed from the Commodore VIC-20 age when I was a teenager for the challenges of the mid 21st century. So it's going to be out of date, and we're going to be prone to virus attacks and hackers. So let's update our software and make that a core conviction of the Intellect's Cove. And our beliefs and judgments then are the things that occur prior to taking action in the world, right? Unless we're talking about impulsive, immediate action. But often, we do some thought processing about, should I do A, B, or C? And cognitive flexibility then gets us to critically reflect upon, maybe you've always done A and B in the past, but now the environment has changed and you have to do D, E, and F, which weren't even on the landscape of your thought process of the menu of options before. But you didn't face these particular challenges. So cognitive flexibility is really critical to enabling us to live successful lives in the 21st century. So these three virtues then, curiosity, intellectual humility, and cognitive flexibility, are, while not a complete list, I would put them at the top of the epistemic or intellectual virtues of the mind that we want to make sure all of us are refining and developing. And so the way I frame what this channel is doing, I'll call it the prime directive of the Intellect's Cove. Those of you that are Star Trek fans will know what the prime directive is. It's kind of like the overarching principle that orients the mandate of the adventure. And so for the Intellect's Cove, the prime directive is to cultivate these intellectual virtues, to plant some seeds that facilitate your curiosity, your humility, and your psychological flexibility, to celebrate them, right? So here I am investing time and energy. I think they're really important. I encourage you to, and we can mutually reinforce our exercise of these virtues together through this channel and through conversations we have with people about these topics. And finally, to refine them, to recognize that it doesn't end, right? You don't just say, oh, I'm humble, I'm curious, and I'm flexible cognitively. Therefore, the moral enterprise is over. These things are constantly changing. Just like the software in our computer, it never gets, to the final thing where there's no further updates. But if we don't do those updates, as I mentioned, we're going to be prone to viruses and hacks, and that already erodes our democracies. Just turn on the news today, and I think everyone would agree that we need, all of these intellectual virtues to help us make some serious headway on the challenges that we face. So that is a summary of this channel's philosophy. I hope it resonates with you, and if it does, I would encourage you to like and subscribe to the channel. Take care.